Hello, Mike. Good to see you again, my friend.
Yeah, nice to see you again. It's been a whole 2 weeks this time, hasn't it?
Yeah, it's been 2 weeks. We missed out on last Thursday. It's fantastic. So good to see you, Mike. You're okay? All okay?
Yeah, I'm good.
Excellent, excellent. Mike, we have lots of friends coming in today. Welcome, Mahendra. Welcome, Subhash. Welcome, Pari. It's excellent to see a lot of you coming in. Mahesh, welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Hey, we got Alf King here. That's thank you for making it. Thank you for making it this time. Brian, how are you doing, my friend? Dominic, Brian.
Hello, Dominic. Hello, Brian.
Sorry?
Brian.
Excellent. So I hope things are better in the UK now. People are getting their shots, their jabs. Welcome, Susan. Good to see you. Welcome, Steve. Sean.
It's always cold where Steve is.
Yes, lots of friends from the UK are coming in, and there are people coming in from the US as well.
Yeah,
and there are people from India. Yeah, it looks like this 1 week gap was a bit too long. Today we've got like a lot of people here. So welcome, ladies and gentlemen. This is excellent. I'm going to get started now because, like always, we've got this presentation from Mike, which is really long, but very interesting, very engaging.
I won't keep people as long as I did last week.
Yes, but that's okay. People enjoyed it. So, okay, friends. So I will get started immediately without any delay. I'm going to introduce Mike first, and then introduce myself, and then also tell you about the intent of this webinar. The goal of this webinar is to take you through these virtual journeys across India and then later other parts of subcontinent as well, and show you what we've got to offer. The idea is to encourage conservation, encourage ecotourism, encourage you to come and travel to some of these places and help conservation through local NGOs, rural empowerment, and appreciate rare species or the cause for, to generate funds or to help any sort of conservation measure. So a bit about Mike. So Mike's introduction is, a lot of you already know Mike, but those who don't, I'm going to read out his introduction to you. Ever since his childhood in England, Mike has been fascinated with watching birds and recording and documenting bird sightings. Mike lived in Delhi in the year 2002. He was a very active member of Delhi Bird Club and contributed to the Atlas of Birds of Delhi and Haryana. After he moved to Bangalore, he soon got interested in exploring sites that weren't visited so frequently. He worked for Bird Count India to help promote Indian birding and especially high-quality data recording. He's an eBird reviewer for India. His interest is in bird recording and migration, and that led to his short-term assignment of running BTO's Bird Track program. And that's about Mike, and a bit about me as well. I am Mohit Aggarwal. Professionally, I'm an experiential ecotourism specialist with deep love for nature. I help people travel to some wonderful places in Asia. I'm the founder of Asian Adventures. It's a 26-year-old travel company. It is also the largest and #1 bird watching tour company in India. The company is on a large mission to help Asian elephants with their corridors, free the Himalayas of plastic waste, and help small wildlife NGOs, and save the ancient Himalayan shrines. My interest is to promote ecotourism in its true essence and convert every tourist to an ecotourist. I must tell you that we've made a lot of progress in the last 1 year, ever since this lockdown happened and COVID started, and we could really focus on the kind of work that we want to do in the area of conservation. So it's got a flip side as well. And right now, my focus is largely on white-winged duck. helping Wildlife Trust of India generate some funds. We haven't been successful so far, but there are so many people now committing to help Wildlife Trust of India with their research project of finding where this bird is other than the usual habitat. And I will talk about that later if you have time. Otherwise, I can always prepare a note and send it to everyone who's here. So welcome, ladies and gentlemen. And this was the goal of this webinar. Welcome, Abba. Welcome, Elizabeth. Oh, good to see you, Elizabeth. So over to you, Mike. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much, Mohit. Yeah, we had an extra break, but I haven't spent the week putting in more and more slides, so we won't be quite as many as we did with Arunachal, I think. But anyway, there's still, as usual, a lot to get through, so let me get started. Off to Goa. So hopefully everyone can see that and everyone can hear. If just someone says yes, that'll be enough to keep going, I think. So I'm sure that quite a lot of you people from England I see on here, so quite a few of those I'm sure have been birding in Goa or have been to Goa as tourists. It is, of course, one of the most popular places in India for Indians to go traveling as well, tourism. So as you all know, it's on the west coast of India on the Arabian Sea. Goa is India's smallest state, and it's heavily dependent on tourism, which it deserves well because it's got brilliant seafood, fantastic beaches, great resorts, interesting heritage, fantastic weather. So it's a really good place, but actually it's also a fabulous place for birding. And it's quite interesting because I think Europeans used to come to Goa, or still do come to Goa, have been doing it quite a long time. But Indians haven't really realised the birding potential in Goa until fairly recently. So it was a little bit more from foreigners early on. No surprise that us Brits would go because it's got good weather, it's got the beaches, it's got great food, it's got great beer. So that's all we're looking for, especially in the winter, to escape the weather that people are enjoying at the moment. But anyway, one of the things with birds, and that's nice about Goa, is there really are birds everywhere. You don't have to go very far. So it ends up being a great location. If you're there on holiday, you can go on holiday with your family who've come for some sun and enjoying the food and drink, and you can dash off doing some birding in the morning before they get up and join them on the beach for the rest of the day. So it is an ideal place generally. Now, as far as birds and wildlife goes, again, this map is really just to show that actually there are three sort of main areas, and we all know Goa for the beaches, the coastal areas, which have some brilliant birding, but actually it's not necessarily realised by so many people that you're really not far from the Western Ghats forests. So all the green area here is the protected areas of the Western Ghats, a couple of national parks and wildlife sanctuaries, and it's true Western Ghats forest birding. Only an hour and a half or so, 2 hours from the coast, and you're in the deep forests. And then the centre area has quite a few inland wetlands. It has some drier areas, open country birds. So the variety in such a small place is pretty remarkable. What else is there to Goa before we see some of the birds? The main sort of tourist things to do are some of the old churches. So people tend to think Goa as a sort of Christian state. It's not often. It's about 2/3 Hindu, but there's a big Christian population, Roman Catholic population, and some of the old churches are well worth at least half a day sneaking off your birding itinerary to go and visit them, and they're close to some of the good birding sites. So there's various churches in Old Goa in particular. The Basilica of Bom Jesus here, which is from about 1600. Most of the churches, I think, are 16th, 17th century. It's quite unusual because it doesn't have whitewash paint on the outside, like most of them. One of the most beautiful, the Church of St. Cajetan, which was apparently built to resemble St. Peter's Basilica in Rome. And the little chapel of St. Catherine. This is the oldest, or certainly one of the oldest churches in Goa, which is quite an interesting graveyard around with lots of the early Portuguese buried there. And an interesting looking one, the Say Cathedral, which did have a tower on the right-hand side until it was destroyed in a storm 200 or 300 years ago. And I think this is the largest of the Goan cathedrals. So well worth a look. Also, a couple of the forts are, and actually for birders, these are quite good birding sites as well. So This is Aguada Fort, or Fort Aguada, which is close to some of the main tourist areas. There's a old Portuguese fort, which is, you can wander around. It's fairly well preserved. An old lighthouse here. There's also a jail, which is actually in active use, so you can't go around there. But if you imbibe too much or you get involved in the drugs in Goa, that's probably where you would find yourself. Aguada itself, though, for birds is quite good. It's sort of dry scrub forest. Used to be one of the few places in Goa you could see peafowl. But peafowl in India generally have dramatically increased in numbers, so they're actually everywhere now, more or less. One of the other forts, this is going further north, at the other end of this main tourist area, is Chapora Fort, which is at the mouth of the Chapora estuary. This is it's a ruined Portuguese fort, but there used to be an old Muslim fort in this area, and it's been fought over between Hindu rulers and Portuguese for a long time. It's quite nice wandering around the ruins here. It's very grassy, it's quite open. You can maybe bump into a jungle bush quail if you are lucky. And the other side of the Chapora estuary there is a site that birders will be familiar with, which is Morjim Beach. And I'll come on to Morjim Beach a little bit later. The beaches, of course, is the other thing most people think of when you think of Goa. And the whole stretch between Morjim and the area we talked about coming south, and Juna, Baga, Kalangut, Kandalim, full of the main popular beaches. And then South Goa, which is a little bit less visited and quiet. You have some popular beaches like Venolim and Palalem. And many of these places actually have quite good birding. Some of the quieter beaches, certainly. Yeah, it's not one of the quieter beaches, although there doesn't seem to be anyone there, so it might be a lockdown picture of the beach. You also find lots of resorts, and you can do some yoga and lots of spiritual retreats. And in fact, if you're birding in some of these places and you're out there early morning with your bins and scope, you may well be sharing the beach with a few early morning yoga enthusiasts. And interestingly, on my last trip, this is what people seem to do on the beach. They spend all their time just taking selfies, including not looking at the sea. What else there is in Goa? One of the most popular things is the night market. This is at Arpora, very big flea market, but also full of a lot of good food, a lot of live music and things like that. So well worth a visit after birding finishes for the day. It's open, I think, in early evening until about midnight. So as you wander around Goa, one of the nice things I think about Goa is you know these tourist areas that we've just seen a little bit of. Some of them gets very busy in the season, these beaches, but it's just a few minutes, especially inland, and you get completely away from it. And most of Goa is very quiet. It's quite green. It's very rural. It's quite spacious, and you find a lot of these old bungalows, that old what they tend to refer to as Portuguese style bungalows. These like big verandas and balconies. Palm trees all around, but they're not really Portuguese style because they're a bit of a mix. They're really Goan style. It's quite unique architecture now. And some of the newer ones, they also continue to build in the same sort of style. So really nice places. You can find some nice homestays and things if you want to get away from the tourist resorts. Carnival is a big festival in Goa. This is rather like the Rio Carnival on a much smaller scale, or Mardi Gras. The Portuguese introduced this as a festival in Goa. And that chap in the middle there will be some local Goan, but he's King Momo, who presides over the festival, which apparently sort of has a motto of eat, drink, and make merry. So quite a good fun 4 days of festival if you're there at that time. This is all part of the carnival. So it's full of floats and parades and plays locally and street festivals, that sort of thing. And this has just happened. This would have been in February, so a bit quieter this year, I'm sure, with lockdown, but it's just at the start of Lent. And a big Christian population as well. Some of the festivals are very big. This is Mass, Missa de Gala Mass. So this is Christmas Eve. This is midnight Mass on Christmas Eve at one of the big cathedrals. And you can see the crowds that get involved in these. Hindu festivals, Ganesh Chaturthi is probably the biggest, and it's extremely big in India generally, but especially in Goa. Celebrates the arrival of Lord Ganesh, the elephant-headed god, to Earth. And he's probably the most revered god in India. A sign of new beginnings and remover of obstacles and bringer of wisdom. So one of the things Ganesh festival is known for is after the 10 days where you would have in your home an idol of Ganesh, he's immersed in some local water body or in the sea, for example. And this has been quite a problem for environmental reasons across India. Plaster of Paris would be used, paints with various chemicals in, and then everything is dumped in the sea and lakes and things like that. So thankfully these days there's a big push to use environmentally friendly idols, so made of clay, for example, and also to limit the number of places they can be immersed. But it's a huge festival if you're around in Goa in October, November time. What else is big in Goa is football. So might surprise some of you from abroad to know that Goa don't have such a great following in cricket, but football is the sport in Goa, which was introduced by an English priest, apparently. So this is a picture. This is Goa in orange playing against Bangalore, FC Goa, that is. So although they're one of the top teams, the Indian Super League, the ISL, which is the top tournament in India, modelled on the cricket's IPL, Goa have never actually won it. But for those from England, the ISL attracts various washed-up English footballers and famous names that you've never actually heard of. But occasionally a few people you might have heard of. So like David James and Wes Brown and Jermaine Pennant have all been ISL footballers recently. So if you wander around Goa, unlike the rest of India where you see kids playing cricket on every street corner, it's more football. So what do you do in Goa? Yes, these are the sort of beach shacks you can spend your time in, just relaxing, drinking, eating. It's a really nice place to just hang about. And of course, have a nice drink. So in recent years, in India generally, and Goa in particular, there's some very nice local breweries. So you can enjoy some Arbor beer, a nice beach shack IPA, I definitely recommend. And food, of course. About time we got to food. Goa's fantastic for food. Seafood, obviously. Fresh foods of the day. This is a Goan fish curry made with pomfret, which is a popular sea fish in Goa. This is a sort of coconut-based gravy. Pomfret brachedo, which is different. This is a marinade, which is a red chili paste made with fenny, which I'll talk about shortly. A lot of prawns to eat. Prawn balchao, which is a sort of pickled prawns, it's like a spicy chili vinegar it's pickled in. And vindaloo, of course, which again, my English friends will be very familiar with, but it's not quite the same. So vindaloo is originally from a Portuguese dish, and it's meat, which in Goa is usually pork, is the main meat, which is marinated in vinegar and garlic to start with. And it has quite a subtle mix of spices. So it's spicy, but it's not overly spicy. Those people who are used to British curry houses and the vindaloo there will realise that we've completely massacred the dish by, I think we don't bother marinating anything and we just pile on the red chilies and try and make it as spicy as possible. So if you come to Goa, do try a vindaloo, and it's a pleasant surprise, hopefully, from your English vindaloos. And you can always round off with some apple pie, a lot of traditional English food. So this was my apple pie on my last trip, apple pie and custard. So fenny, I mentioned. So fenny is the alcoholic drink, very popular in Goa, made from cashews typically. And this is traditionally how it's distilled. So it's made from the cashew fruit, the cashew apple, which is what surrounds the nut. And that's distilled to make fenny, which is a colourless liquid. Not too strong usually. It's often can be drunk neat or served with lemonade and various other mixes. It's also made from coconut as well sometimes, which is so it's the toddy fermented from the coconut palm. but definitely worth trying some fenny when you're in Goa. So anyway, closer to the birds, let's start in the Western Ghats. So obviously, if those of you were around for, I think it was the first webinar we did, or second webinar where we did birds of the Western Ghats, we covered some of this, but it's the main endemic bird area in India. Some fantastic ancient forests here, and Goa is one of the best places to see many of the endemics. So the main area is Bhagwan Mahavir Wildlife Sanctuary and the contiguous Molam National Park, which is super forest, and there's some nice places to stay there. A lot of the endemics you can find fairly easily. So just to quickly show where that is, Bhagwan Mahavir is actually very close to the border with Karnataka. If you go east, you're going into Karnataka, but really just 2 hours from the Goan coast. And that's the main place probably a lot of people will do birding in the Ghats. But if you go to South Goa, there's some really nice sanctuaries there as well, Netravali and Kotigal, which are slightly less visited, but are really worthwhile. And this is sort of forest. This doesn't look like Goa to most people who know Goa, does it? These deep hills, this is obviously a monsoon time picture, so how green it is. This is Dudhsagar waterfall, one of the highest waterfalls in India. Dudhsagar meaning actually sea of milk. Dudh is milk in Hindi. This is on the Karnataka border. And so inside Bhagwan Mahavir Wildlife Sanctuary, most birders who've been will have been to this particular place, Tamdisula Temple. It's a 12th century temple, the oldest in Goa. Really nice little temple, but actually what's more interesting to us is it's in some fantastic forest. Lovely forest, some open clearings, and it's a really good place to get your first taste of some of the Western Ghats birds. And this is the river, runs behind Tamdisula Temple, which is well worth a walk if you can walk along the river. And similar sort of habitat further south. This is in Kotigal, which we mentioned. So this is on the southern border of Goa with Karnataka. Slightly different bird life, a lot of the similar birds, but some birds are a bit easier here. Something like Wayanad laughing thrush is a possibility here. And then some of the birds. Crimson-backed sunbird, also known as small sunbird, is an endemic, is really a tiny sunbird and very common in Goa and the Ghats. This is one of the commonest birds you come across. And amongst the sunbirds, worth looking out for little spider hunter, which does occur in Northeast Asia and Northeast India and Southeast Asia as well. Goa is a reasonably good place to find it. It feeds on nectar, but it also probes a lot for spiders and other insects. You can often find them feeding on banana flowers. Brown-cheeked fulvetta is a fairly common small babbler. It's found again in the northeast where it's quite difficult to see. It's much easier to see in the Western Ghats. Vernal hanging parrot, doing what it should do by its name here. So this was what we used to be known as Indian lorikeet. Again, they're very common, and you hear them frequently as they dart over the forest canopy. What's interesting that I found out on my trip to Goa in December is the way they perch upside down like this. They actually roost at night, exactly like this. So they hang upside down like a bat at night. We found one in the torchlight at the resort I was staying in, and it was just hanging down like this with the red rump shining through between the wings like this. Grey-fronted green pigeon. Some of you may know it as pompadour green pigeon, which was split. So this is now an endemic to the Western Ghats. This is a female. Males have brown wings and a brown back. Asian fairy bluebirds are fairly common, superbirds. Even the female at the bottom is not bad, but the males are stunning. Yellow-browed bulbul is actually a pretty common bird throughout the Western Ghats. It's one of the commonest, certainly bulbul there, and in some places it's probably even the commonest bird in some of the forests. And this stunning bulbul, flame-throated, or sometimes called ruby-throated bulbul. So this is actually Goa's state bird, and I think a unlike some of the other states where we have a roller or something like that as our state bird, I think Goa's got the perfect state bird. It looks fantastic. It's not rare, but actually it's not that easy to see. So it's always a highlight of the day when you do see one. And Goa is probably the best place in India to see them. So super one, flame-throated bulbuls. Black-naped monarch you'll find throughout most of the Western Ghats and elsewhere. And Indian blackbird. This is pretty similar to the European blackbird. It's slightly duskier below, but they're secretive. So unlike your common blackbirds hopping around on your lawn back in England, thrushes, most of the thrushes are really quite difficult to see and easily spooked here. There's a couple of different subspecies. I'm not sure which one this is, because I think they, in the Western Ghats, it's resident, but they have local movements. So, and I'm not sure if this bird was taken in Goa actually. There's one is also sometimes called black-capped blackbird. There's a slightly darker black head, which this does. So it's probably that subspecies. And Indian yellow tit. This is a resident. This is a juvenile, which is why it's looking a bit duller. Although again, this has got a couple of different subspecies in India, and the Western Ghats bird is a bit duller generally. Also, as you might have heard before, this used to be black lord tit until the Himalayan one was split from the one that occurs in the peninsula of India. There's plenty of warblers. This is the only one I've got today to show, I think, unlike last week where I showed lots of difficult ones. This is Western crowned warbler, Philosopher's warbler, obviously, quite a nice one, quite a smart one. It's actually found in flocks very often, so you can come across small groups. You usually do find more than one, so you'll find groups of 5, 6, even like sort of 15 to 20 together sometimes in the winter. So winters here, it breeds in the Western Himalayas. So if you go to parts of Himachal and Kashmir and places in late May, June, you find it's a very common warbler there. White-bellied blue flycatcher is a lovely endemic. This is the male. The female is quite different. The female is brown with an orangey breast. And white-bellied woodpecker. This is very large. I think it's the largest woodpecker in India, certainly. Very large and very noisy. There was one calling at the resort when I was there in December. And rather down close to the other end of the scale, one of the smaller woodpeckers is heart-spotted woodpecker. A little bit tricky to see from this particular image. It's a bit further away, but it's named because of the heart spots, where you can see the yellow and black from the lower on the wings and the tertials, and they are heart-shaped. It's quite a strange woodpecker. There's quite a long but thin neck, and these hunched shoulders, the wings. It's a very odd shape. But great bird to see in Goa. And then there's something the next few birds all have in common. These are some of the endemics. Malabar parakeet, which is also known as blue-winged parakeet, which you can see appropriately from the leading edge of one wing here. These are common. You'll find these in most Western Ghats. Malabar starling as well. This is a resident bird, very similar to chestnut-tailed starling, which used to be considered a subspecies of. This is a much white-headed. Chestnut-tailed starling is here in the winter as well, so you have to be a little bit careful. They can be very similar, especially females. Malabar barbet is another of the endemics here. Sounds almost identical to coppersmith. It's quite tricky to tell the difference in sound, but in the Western Ghats forests, you mostly find Malabar, and then towards the coast and the plains areas, you mostly find coppersmiths. Malabar grey hornbill. I think you're probably getting the picture of some of these endemics and the originality of the naming that was done here. Malabar grey hornbill is another Western Ghats endemic. You can find that fairly easily around. It has a really interesting laughing call, which you hear more often than you see them. And another endemic hornbill, Malabar pied hornbill, which interestingly enough, it occurs throughout the Western Ghats. But if you come and you do a typical South India birding tour, and you do Kerala, you do some of Tamil Nadu, a bit of Karnataka, you don't generally see it. It's unlike most birds, it's commoner in the northern Western Ghats. So Goa is probably the best place to see it, and you can see it in gardens. In fact, on a December trip, this was the first interesting bird in the taxi or leading away from the airport before I got anywhere. Malabar wood shrike. This is another endemic. It used to be considered a subspecies of large wood shrike, which is now one you see in the Himalayas. Malabar is endemic to the Western Ghats again. And Malabar whistling thrush, known sometimes as whistling schoolboy. It has a very melancholy song with quite human-like whistles that you'll hear very commonly in early mornings especially. And of course, Malabar trogon really is one of the key birds to find in the Western Ghats. Really stunning, really bright red colour. You hear them a bit more often than you see them. Not always easy to see, but usually do manage to find some around this area. That's the male with a black head and real bright red belly. And the female is still pretty impressive too. So that's enough Malabar birds time for a while, but we also have a few other endemics, which are Nilgiri endemics. The Nilgiris being the hills further south, so the sort of Karnataka, Tamil Nadu, Kerala border more. This is Nilgiri flowerpecker, where you'll find throughout the Western Ghats. It used to be a subspecies of plain flowerpecker from the northeast. And this one, they do obviously peck in flowers, they feed in flowers. They also, you can see this one's covered in pollen on the forehead. But they also take some berries, including mistletoe berries, which are toxic to us and most animals, but flowerpeckers love them. And another Nilgiri bird here, Nilgiri wood pigeon. Fairly scarce. It's quite widespread in the Western Ghats, but not easy to see generally. And if you are in these areas and you're walking along that stream at the back of Tamdi Surla that I showed earlier, one of the key birds to look out for is the tiny oriental dwarf kingfisher, which is a real stunning bird. Not very easy to see at any time of year, easier in the monsoons generally. And there's another river kingfisher in this area, which is the blue-eared kingfisher, slightly more regularly found and similar to common kingfisher as people are used to, but a sort of deeper blue, almost the colour of my shirt, in fact, and blue ears, so the covers are fully blue and on them. But this is another super bird you look for on the streams in the forests. Brown wood owl is one of the owls around here. This is one of the larger owls, so a tawny owl sort of size. Oriental scops, which is strictly nocturnal, but fairly common in the forests. And if you are going out at night, there's 2 or 3 nightjars to look for. This one is a Southwest India specialist. This is Jordan's nightjar. And there's another real key one to try and find in these forests. So this is Sri Lanka frogmouth, endemic to the Western Ghats and Sri Lanka. Really weird birds, the frogmouths. They have this massive bill, and they are strictly nocturnal, but they roost fairly low down, so often like a meter, 2-3 meters high, in quite dense forest usually. But then if you can find them, you can sometimes get extremely close to them. This pair is really quite out in the open. They're sometimes a bit hidden away. The female is the browner, the more orangey one on the right-hand side. The male is the grayer one. But they have a few, they like the same roosts all the time. So once you can find a pair, they're quite reliable to be seen there. But they do get disturbed and then move a few meters away, and it's a real struggle to find them again. And a really tough one to see. This is Malayan night heron. I've never seen it yet. I've tried a few times, especially in Goa. It's and I was quite absolutely sure, I think, what its status is. It's a monsoon breeder, and that's the best time to find them. So if you were to sort of walk along or walk through those sort of streams in the monsoon, there's a chance of finding Malayan night heron around. It's thought they locally migrate as well, including to Sri Lanka. So I think there's been a recovery of a bird from Sri Lanka. So it may be that nearly all of them do that and migrate further south, including into Sri Lanka, which is why you don't really find them in the winter. But super bird if you can find it. And another one that I've not managed to catch up with, or not quite, Wynard laughing thrush. I think you talked about this one in an earlier webinar as well. So it's widespread in the Western Ghats, but scarce. They tend to go in quite large flocks and move around in the area. So I think if you're lucky, you can bump into several of them, and if you're unlucky, you don't find any. But the tour I did last January, before we got locked down, we did manage to see one on the tour, except one of my guests saw it well, and I saw the back end of it as it flew away. But Kotigao, as I mentioned in Goa, is quite a good place for Wynard laughing thrush. And there's a few mammals here, of course. Malabar giant squirrel is quite common. You'll see and hear these regularly. This really is a large squirrel, as you'd expect from its name. And something else you'll see commonly are bonnet macaques. A little bit tougher to see, but they are around in all these forests, is the leopard. And also are around and tough to see, strictly nocturnal, are Indian porcupines. It's also a fantastic area for butterflies, especially if you're there in the monsoon, but even during the winter. So this particular one is the southern birdwing, which is endemic to southwest India, South India at least. It's the second largest butterfly in India. There's a Himalayan golden birdwing, which is very slightly larger, but it's a spectacular butterfly. As is this one. This is the Malabar tree nymph, which I think is the national butterfly of Goa. It has a very slow gliding flight that it does along through the canopy. So you can quite often see these in the forest, just gliding through the treetops. And this one, except this is probably the worst specimen ever of it. This is particularly tatty, but it's one of the most brilliant butterflies there, the Malabar banded peacock. It's a type of swallowtail. And Malabar raven, which is another type of swallowtail. It doesn't have a tail this time. This is quite interesting, actually, because it's endemic to Western Ghats. I don't quite know how the naming came about, because this is a raven, and it's a mimic of another species of butterfly, common crow. So I don't know which came first. Crow got named after the birds for some reason, maybe just colour, but this is the raven, which mimics crow, the common crow being poisonous. Also a super place for amphibians, more than 200 species in the Western Ghats. You can see some at any time of year, but if you come in the monsoon time, the place is incredible. I did mention actually at the start is Goa, people tend to come in the winter. It gets hot, so it is hot all year round. But the monsoon time is actually fantastic in Goa. It's incredibly green. It rains incredibly hard, so there's times for days where you might not be able to do much. But it's just a beautiful landscape, and it's when the rain stops, it's fantastically birdy and certainly brilliant for amphibians if you're into those. A Malabar tree toad here, a marbled balloon frog. And a bit of a shame that this one's actually a common toad, because this one is from my trip in December. This one sat on my toilet, so this would have been the frog on the bog, but unfortunately it's the toad, and I won't look for a rhyme for that one. And this is where it was actually. This is Nature's Nest, which is a fantastic eco resort, very close to, well, right on the edge of Bhagwan Mahavir Wildlife Sanctuary, so close to the Tamdi temple area around, and it's really, really birdy around. So it's a great place to just hang around in the middle of the day if it's a bit hot after your birding session, and they do some fantastic food as well. So that was the Western Ghats. I've seen quite a lot of the birds there. It's well worth an overnight stay for 2 or 3 days, but even if you're on a family holiday visiting the beach areas, you can visit somewhere like Bondla Wildlife Sanctuary, which is sort of Western Ghats forest and brilliant birding, and you can do that as a morning trip from the coast. So it's brilliant to get a lot of variety of birds on a short trip. But otherwise, if you go inland, inland Goa is dotted with some really interesting birding places. Now it includes quite a lot of some large lakes and other water bodies, but you have flooded paddy fields, various marshes everywhere. You don't really have to go far in Goa to find birds. You can find your own birds in all sorts of places. So whilst there are a few sites, such as some of the lakes, Karambalim and Mayam, which I'll talk about and show you a bit more, it's well worth just exploring. There's a lot of birds to be found without going out of your way too far. So the plains are sort of more open. So we've got these various lakes, but generally much more open. Quite a lot is agricultural areas, but all quite birdy. And then we'll talk about a little bit more coming on to some of the plateaus, so some of the really open rocky areas which have quite different habitat. So just to show you on a map here, in the top left of this map that we're looking at, where Socorro is marked, which is one of the birding sites, you're just inland from the main North Goa tourist area. So that stretch of coast there, Kandalim, Kalangut, Baga, and Juna is where most tourists tend to stay. So these are really quite close sites. And Maina down in the bottom, which is a fantastic wetland area. Even that is sort of, I suppose, an hour, just over an hour, hour and 15 minutes drive from those beaches areas. So it's really pretty convenient to travel around some of these sites. This is Karambalim Lake, which is a popular site. Many of you may have been to before. One of the best inland water bodies in Goa. The whole area has this very large lake and extensive marshes and mangrove areas. This particular lake, this was a picture taken from 3 or 4 years ago, which is very well vegetated, full of lesser whistling ducks and swamp hens and jacanas and things like that. The last time I went, this was completely open water. So all the vegetation had been cleared out and there were no birds on it, which is a little bit disappointing to start with. But then I found actually that just across the road, the area of agricultural fields had now become all flooded marshes. So actually it was fantastic habitat in the area, but not quite the same bit. So it is a great area. You can explore around quite a lot around here. Then another of the North Goa lakes that's quite well known is Mayam Lake. Very different. It's a tourist site, as you can see. You can go boating on this lake, but this is fantastic forest surrounding the lake. So the lake itself doesn't have too many birds, but the forest is very good. It's a reliable and by far the best site for orange-breasted green pigeon. And in the south, Maina, that I mentioned on that map, Maina Kutarim, this whole area is a really extensive area full of agricultural wetlands, lots of small dams and bunds that have created various waterways through, and it's a spread out area and lots of good birding. And another wetland area from in this part of Goa is Salvador do Mondo. I remember a few years ago, I didn't know anything about this place, and I just was driving along and saw a load of birds beside the road and stopped and watched and set up a hotspot on eBird, I think. And just a few years later, now it's a really regular birding spot. There's a huge list of birds. It's changed quite a lot in habitat, which is what's made it attractive. So it's a tidal wetland, but it's artificially created. So there's various sluice gates that get closed to trap fish in for fishing. But this whole network of little waterways, mangroves have grown along a lot of these bunds, and it's become a super wader and waterbird area and general birding area. What's interesting is the mangroves have grown along, and you started to get a few sightings of collared kingfisher, which I'll talk about a little bit later, but is a real mangrove specialist and extremely difficult to see from walking. You needed to take a boat trip, but now sometimes you can see those in Salvador do Mondo. And when I was there in December, I also had a pair of otters, smooth-coated otters. So a brilliant sight. A very different habitat, not very far away. This is one of the plateaus, and the rocky areas is a laterite plateau. The laterite soil is a very reddish soil, rich in iron, and you get these through Goa, through Karnataka, these sort of open plateaus. Very good dry country birds in general, larks and pipits and buntings, and also some of the scrub forests, so some of the drier area scrub forest birds like malkoas and Jordan's leaf bird, things like that. And the little sites here is Divar Island. You may have heard of Chorao Island, which is just across the river here. In fact, if you're in Goa and you ask anyone and they know you're going to look at birds, they'll say, "Oh, you're going to the Salim Ali Sanctuary." So on Chorao Island, there is a Salim Ali bird sanctuary that everybody in Goa knows about. And it's good, has some good birds, but actually it's not. It's probably one of the poorest places to visit, to go birding in Goa, because there's so many other places. These extensive mangroves, and it's very difficult to access and see very much. But just across the river is Divar Island, much more open, has some big areas of mangroves, but also has some nice grasslands, again good for pipits and larks, and it has a small roost in the winter of pallid harriers. So all these sort of areas in the plains, I've highlighted a few sites there, but there are so many interesting sites without going very far. So these sort of birds which you can show now are ones that you can more or less find anywhere. White-browed bulbul is a common bulbul of any of these sort of secondary forest areas of the plains and coastal areas. Ruddy shelduck you can find on some of the larger water bodies. Used to be pretty scarce in Goa. It's got commoner in recent years, and so somewhere around Karambalim, or the wetlands off Karambalim, is one place you can find ruddy shelducks. Gargani is also one of the most common ducks you'll find in India in the winter. Black-tailed godwits, find flocks of black-tailed godwits inland. Common snipe is the common snipe, but you will also find pintail snipe with some luck in places. And actually this winter in India, we've had an influx of jack snipes. So there's been quite a few jack snipe records Goa, I know, has had. Around my area in Bangalore has had, although I haven't seen one. Pacific golden plovers. There's quite a few of these wetlands that attract quite good numbers of Pacific golden plover. It's a very long distance migrant, and it's majorly in decline. So one of the birds where the studies that have been done on counts available in India show probably about an 80% decline in numbers of these over the last 20 years at least, certainly. Lesser adjutant you'll find in a lot of these mangrove areas. Those of you who watched our Assam webinar recently will have seen the greater adjutant. So the lesser is the slightly smaller and more attractive cousin of the greater. That's resident here in places like Chorao Island and the Salim Ali Sanctuary. Striated heron is again somewhere you can find some of these inland water bodies. They're solitary, so you don't see too many of them, but Salvador de Mondo, for example, is a good place for those. And some of the owls that you can find around here, Mayam Lake that I showed earlier, it can be quite good for brown fish owl. The back of the Tamdisula temple has brown fish owl. We went looking for one, but we found fresh pellets from brown fish owl last time I was there, but no owl. And the pellets were mostly full of crab bones, so that's what they're eating mainly. And brown hawk owl. Karambalim Lake had a famous roosting brown hawk owl, or brown bubuk, as it's sometimes called, but they're actually fairly widespread. They were. You might even hear one from your hotel on the coast sometime. There was one calling in the middle of Kandalim about 6 o'clock in the morning when I was last there. Changeable hawk eagle we find in some of these scrub forests. And amur falcons, if you're lucky, particularly if you're there in sort of November time, maybe. As you'll know, the amur falcons do a crossing in the autumn from sort of Mongolia and eastern China, stage in Nagaland in like the hundreds of thousands or even millions, and then they cross over the west coast of India to go to southern Africa. They migrate at night, so not too many are seen, but a few hang around. So it's fairly regular in Goa in small numbers anyway in the late autumn. There's the orange-breasted green pigeon I mentioned, that Mayhem Lake is a particularly good place for. Red spur fowl is quite secretive, but in a lot of these secondary forest areas, as well as in the Western Ghats itself. And chestnut-headed beaters. This was a spectacular roost of at least 200 chestnut-headed beaters in the evening, mixed with green beaters as well, but a fantastic noise they were all making. Indian pitter, this one a juvenile. So Indian pitter is a difficult one to search out in the winter. You're usually lucky, usually find one somewhere on your trip. But in the summer, it's very common in Goa. It breeds here. It's a very common sound if you're traveling around in the monsoon time. It's known as the 6 o'clock bird sometimes because it calls most often at 6 o'clock in the morning and 6 o'clock in the evening. Vigor's sunbird. Vigor's is sunbird. This is endemic. It's slightly unusual as a Western Ghats endemic because it's not found in the southern Western Ghats. It's really just found in Maharashtra and Goa. Really stunning bird, like a crimson sunbird of the Himalayas, which it used to be lumped with. And interestingly, this one it's a tricky bird to find sometimes, but it's actually in some of the hotel gardens. So it's worth looking out. When you're relaxing in the middle of the day, you might come across a Vigor's sunbird. Jordan's leafbird is typically found in the drier scrub areas. Golden-fronted leafbird you also get, but in the more foresty areas typically. And these sort of rocky plateaus that we're talking about are sort of the places to look for Malabar lark. It's an endemic lark, very much like a crested lark. And in the winter, Sykes's short-toed lark. So this is a very recent split from greater short-toed lark. The better name for this actually would be Mongolian short-toed lark because they almost exclusively breed in Mongolia. Winter throughout South India generally. Almost impossible to tell from greater short-toed lark. This one's a bit easier because it's quite orangey generally, which is a sign, but they're very tricky. I will struggle with them. So at the moment, we tend to think if we're in South India and Goa, maybe a bit into Maharashtra, they're probably all Sykes's short-toed larks. But if you're in Gujarat, Rajasthan, and places like that, they're probably all greater short-toed larks. But it's not that simple. We know they mix in flocks a bit as well. Pallid harrier, as I mentioned, they do roost in small numbers in Divar Island. So you can see this around a few places in Goa with some luck in the winter. And a grey-headed bulbul is an endemic bulbul, quite scarce in the Western Ghats generally, not so easy to find. It does quite like disturbed and secondary habitats. So even some of the areas like Arpora, which is now very close to Baga and is quite well developed, still has some nice forest around, and grey-headed bulbuls I was pleased to see were still there in December. And some of these dry areas in the winter maybe get flocks of buntings, so red-headed bunting and grey-neck bunting in good numbers there this winter. On Socorro Plateau, for example, there's a flock of about 30. Munias are quite common. It's incredibly agricultural. It's a really rural area when you get away from the coast. So munias are common, white-rumped munia, and you can find in places the endemic black-throated munia, or the endemic shared with Sri Lanka as well. And then to the coast. We haven't visited the coast yet, which is what you probably mostly think of in Goa. So many of the coastal areas are really good for gulls, terns, waders and things. Some of the main areas, Morjim Beach is probably the most famous. I mentioned earlier on the mouth of the Chapora estuary, but there's various other ones. Agasaim in the further south. Benolim is one of the southern beaches, which are popular tourist areas. There can be plenty of birds on these beaches as well. So, and even on your busy beaches in Baga and Kalangut, which can be full of tourists, you'll still find flocks of lesser sandplovers quite often. But Morjim is very often the best place. It's right at the mouth of the Chapora estuary, and flocks come in and out of that. They roost in the estuary, they'll sit on the sandbars in the estuary. And depending on the tide, you can sometimes get birds resting very close on the beach there. So if you want to practice wader identification and gull identification, it's a brilliant place. It's turned up quite a lot of rarities in India as well. So you'll find you can get quite close views sometimes of the waders, which usually are lots of lesser sand plovers and lots of Kentish plovers, a few sandling mixed in. In this picture, I can see there's a dunlin in the middle, just a couple of dunlins in the middle, just left the middle. and there's a turnstone, ruddy turnstone, right on the left-hand side. So lesser sand plover is the commonest wintering waders, and even a few stay in the summer, a few over summer on the beaches here. But if you look carefully in the lesser sand plovers, you can usually find a greater sand plover. Pretty difficult to identify. This one's not too bad. This one has a nice larger bill, slightly more angular head shape, and longer legs, which are often quite pale green like these are, but not always. When you see them together, the size is usually size difference is usually clear, but on their own they can be pretty tricky. Western reef egrets along the coast here. This is the two morphs that you get, the grey morph and the white morph, both of which morphs are quite common. Some of the other waders, Terek sandpiper is a nice one. You could find that on the beaches, on the Morgim, and some of the inland wetlands as well sometimes. So most of these waders are winter visitors in Goa. They're all typically northern Russia breeders, so they're doing long migrations. There's a bunch of turnstones, ruddy turnstones, on a boat in the Chapora estuary. Curlew sandpipers, another winterer here. There's a lesser sandplover, lesser sandplover in there with them as well. Bar-tailed godwits, a little bit of a scarcer one in India generally. It's almost exclusively coastal, incredibly rare to see this anywhere in India away from the coasts. But if you're in Goa a little bit later in the year, through staying on till April or May, you might get a chance to see them in the breeding plumage with this brick red colour underneath. And scanning through the small waders, this is one of your targets, broad-billed sandpiper. Pretty scarce in India. I think most of them breed in Scandinavia or parts of northern Russia. Winter around the coasts, but not very easy in India. And a great knot is another key one. Not common in Goa at all, but usually a few around each autumn or winter. Usually winters in like a lot around Australia, northern Australia coast. Another migrant wader that's in severe decline. Gulls and terns are the other things that's brilliant on the beach here. If the tide's just right, you'll find birds will sit right at the mouth of the estuary and wait and then move off. So you get a good chance to look through flocks of gulls and terns. Here, the gulls in this picture are all brown-headed gull, which is the most common gull here, or most common small gull, I should say. And a selection of terns. They're mostly lesser crested terns here. See one sandwich tern in the middle. You'll also find greater crested tern, a little bit bigger, a little bit darker grey above, and with a yellower bill than the lesser crested tern. And gull-billed tern is resident, so along like both the crested terns, these are the resident terns. Others are more winter visitors. And amongst the gulls, you can usually find some slender-billed gulls. And a few black-headed gulls as well, but Morgim has an incredible record for gulls generally, partly because a lot of European birders love looking at gulls and trying to figure them out. So you'll see lesser blackback gulls, which are Huglin's gull or steppe gull, Huglini or barabensis, the subspecies or species, depending who you want to follow. They are both quite common, but Goa's also turned up. I think India's only record of Baltic gull, and Scandinavian as a blackback gull, is India's only record of Franklin's gull, which is an American gull. One of the few records of sooty gull from the Middle East. Kittiwake turned up here a few times, so it's a brilliant place for looking out for the unexpected. Pallas's gull is one of the other ones you have a good chance of seeing. These two fantastic adults. And one thing worth doing on a trip to Goa is a boat trip on the Zuari River. This is the longest river in Goa. That connects to various others, but it's famous for doing crocodile trips. But for birders, it's famous for trying to find collared kingfisher that I mentioned earlier. So it's well worth doing a boat trip along the Zuari River. Partly look out for this fella. This is a marsh crocodile or marsh mugger. And you might see this individual. This is a peregrine, which has been commonly seen on the bridge, wintering on the bridge where the boat goes from. This will be one of the northern Russia Calidus wintering peregrines, but obviously liking coming back to the same area winter after winter. Ospreys you could see in quite a few places, so fairly regularly seen on this particular boat trip. And not regularly seen, but this is one of the best ways of seeing it, is slaty-breasted rail, which is, in this area anyway, is a mangrove specialist. The mangroves are really difficult to access, so boat trip is probably the best way to see it. But you can occasionally see it from some of the inland areas where you can walk along some of the channels in the mangroves. Black-capped kingfisher is not just along this boat trip, but you can see it on the coast and other places, some of the inland water bodies in the winter. It's probably a winter visitor to India from China, but there seem to be a few summer records, so it's not quite sure of its status. And of course, collared kingfisher, which is the key bird to see here. It's got many subspecies across Arabia through to Southeast Asia. But this is a particular subspecies restricted to the west coast of India in mangroves. So really, I think just Maharashtra, Goa. I think it has been seen down to Kerala, but not seen regularly anywhere except here, pretty much. So that was 4 species of kingfishers we've covered so far in this presentation. So I thought I may as well complete it because Goa, aside from northeast India, Goa has the largest number of kingfishers you can find in any state in India. I think Orissa also has 8 species. Goa has 8 species that are not too rare. So I think theoretically you could, in here, this is a common kingfisher at the top left, white-throated at the top right, pied at the bottom right, and stork-billed is the bottom left one, which you can find along some of the forest streams, or the bigger open forest streams in particular. I guess theoretically it's possible to see them all in a day. With the forests of the Western Ghats being quite close to the coast, you could spend the morning there and be lucky with your oriental dwarf and your blue-eared kingfisher, and then you could come down to the coast and maybe pick up these, do a boat trip on the Zuari River and get your collared kingfisher and manage 8 in the day. And if you can see that, well, what better could you do than spend the rest of the day drinking your 9th kingfisher? Okay, what a way to, that's the way to finish, I think. So, thank you very much.
This was absolutely brilliant, Mike. And my deepest gratitude to all the photographers who've contributed to making this a big success. And this was absolutely wonderful. And thanks, a big thank you to Salil to put it together with you. Of course, it's taken you a long time to organize it. And this is, Mike, I think these sort of webinars make a lot of difference because they move people. They move people to appreciate the cause of nature. So I think it's important to let them know what you have in mind for the next few webinars that you've planned. Is the next one, are you going to take them to the mountains or back to the coast?
Well, yes, I was thinking of doing the mountains, but then someone said they'd like to do a trip to the coast. So I think we're going to head off next time from the west coast where we've been now. We're going to head off east and visit the Andaman Islands for the next one. So the Andamans, quite a nice follow-on from Western Ghats places because it's also full of endemics. So you'll find where tonight I talked about lots of birds that are named after Malabar. We'll find lots of Andaman somethings next week. And it's also quite a popular trip for people to do 2 weeks visiting Southwest India and then flying to the Andamans for 5 or 6 days to do some birding there. So I think that was the plan for the next one. But after that, there'll be too much beaches for me. After that, I think we need to go back to the mountains.
Yes. And I think Goa is such a great choice because, you know, let's say you're coming with your family or you're coming with friends and they may or may not be interested in birds that much. But you can get your birdie time out and you can go out, do your birding with your guide or while everybody else can be on a beach shack or wherever, whatever they're doing. So Goa is really the place to either start your trip or to wind up your trip, when you're in India, or for Indians as well. Mike, do you plan to conduct some of these trips? Do you have a calendar ready?
I do indeed. I hope that when things start opening up, we'll do a full program. So at the moment, we've put together a full program for, well, actually from about a week's time, if anyone's interested. But I don't think too many people can get here or will be allowed to come in a week's time. But certainly, what I'm hoping is international travel maybe open up for a trip to Ladakh or somewhere in June. But we're assuming that things are normal from next winter onwards. So from November onwards, we have a full program to do the best of India throughout. I think you can send around the link probably for what we have scheduled, but we're quite flexible at the moment. Obviously, no one knows their travel plans. So if anyone's interested in doing anything next autumn or immediately things open up and where we let people back into the country, we can sort something out. So I'm itching to get away again.
Absolutely. So what I've done, Mike, is I've posted your link of the tours that you're going to do this winter, and have people join you if they like. And if all goes well, and we get up, to BBWF, that's Bird Watching Fair, and we could then meet our potential guests who want to travel with us.
Yeah.
Yeah. The second thing that I want to again reiterate here is that my concern for white-winged duck, Brian, Alan Blanchard, and a few other people have already shown interest in doing something about it. So you and I will sit down one of these days, put some concept note together, seek help from Wildlife Trust of India, and put it out to audience in the next webinar, what they can do to help carry on this research of white-winged duck. Mahesh has already been, he's back from his 2-week stint in Pake. They couldn't find it, but they went to the right habitats. But there's still a lot more to see and to discover. So let's talk about that, and let's tell people what we have in mind in terms of conservation. How we also working with some of the communities, and let's form a plan. And maybe if it requires a separate webinar, we'll hold that, and we'll do it together.
Absolutely, yeah. I wanted to pick up on one or two of the questions. Actually, I see posted in the chat. There's one from Annie. Annie Woodhouse mentioned about a serious problem with disturbance by dogs on Morgian Beach when she was there. That's an interesting one, actually, because there's quite a few feral dogs that roam around there, and of course they chase the roosting waders very regularly. So they were doing that the last time I was there. So feral dogs are quite a big problem in lots of places. It's interesting at Morgian because Morgian always has quite big flocks of lesser sandplovers. And so the dogs will chase them, and they just fly up the beach a few hundred meters and settle down again. And they seem to do that for a lot of the day. I think dogs get quite tired, but there is quite a lot of disturbance. Probably more serious than the dogs disturbing roosting birds is the turtles. So I didn't mention that, but Morgian Beach is a nesting site for olive ridley turtle. I don't know whether it still is, whether it's a fairly quiet beach generally. There's a few tourists, not too many. So it doesn't get too much disturbance like the ones further south. It's had turtles nesting there, but I don't actually know whether they still nest there now. But the dog problem can be a bit of a problem in some of these places.
Mike, I've shared your trip report here with people. So folks if you wish to download the trip report that Mike churned out from his last trip in December, it'll be very useful for you to go through it. It'll help you plan your trip and then also enjoy the experience again. What you've seen here, you'll be able to read about it.
Mm-hmm.
So here is and then those people who probably joined in later or left earlier, they will get the replay link anyways. So friends, if you ever think that you want to come for a webinar but you can't make it, just go ahead and register anyways for the next webinar whenever it happens, so that even if you can't make it, that's fine, because you'll get the replay link that's automated system. So so don't shy away from registering ever if you think it's important to you.
A good question from Steve Lister just mentioned, has anyone explored the possibilities of pelagic birding off Goa? That's an interesting one, because I was actually going to do a little section on pelagic birding, but then I realized I'd got too much to talk about. So yes, the answer is they have. Goa and further south of both Karnataka and Kerala. And there's been some interesting sightings. I should probably do a webinar on pelagic birds, maybe. It's a bit difficult off India. There aren't that many birds compared to some of the other places around the world where people do pelagics. But for landlocked Indians who don't see the sea very much, it's been really interesting. So Goa, if you travel to Goa in the monsoon for a nice relaxing break, you can see Wilson's storm petrels from your hotel if you could scope from your balcony. The last time I was there in the monsoon, I think I had a flock of 80 feeding in the bay one day. Yeah, occasionally there ought to be a large passage of bridled terns going past in like sort of August, September time. White-cheeked tern possibly. There's records of regularly of masked booby, flesh-footed shearwater a bit further south. So there are a few good birds, but one of the problems of Western India is that the sea is incredibly shallow. So if you want to get to like deep water, which is probably proper pelagic, where the continental shelf drops off, it's sort of 1,800 kilometers offshore. So you can't really get out that far. But it's interesting, and it should be explored a bit more, certainly. So I've only done one trip off Goa and a few of Kerala, but it's well worth exploring more.
Excellent. So friends, if anybody has any other question, you can put it here in the chat, and then Mike would answer. If not, then we would see you next week, which is the 11th, I think March 11th. And Mike will talk to you about the birds of animals. And then he'd take you through the entire journey again. So I think, Mike, that's it. I don't see any questions coming up.
Okay, great. I'm off to have a glass of my fenny.
Great, and thank you for introducing, for making us salivate for all the vindaloos and the fish that you sort of all the
vindaloo I had a nest last time. That was super.
Yes. So. Yes. Okay. Great. Thank you, friends. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for being here. Thank you, Mike. Bye. Bye.
Bye.